Have you ever stopped to think that there are enemies you don't even see, but who are working day and night against your life? People, situations, and even spiritual forces that silently rise up, plotting against your progress, trying to block doors that God has already opened for you. Today I'm going to show you something that can completely change this situation. Psalm 35 isn't just a biblical text to be read in a common way, it's a spiritual weapon capable of overthrowing what has been hidden and paralyzing your life. If you've been feeling like your struggles go beyond the visible, that they're not just against people, but against something bigger, this video is exactly what you needed today. Because when you put this psalm into practice, God steps in to fight battles you can't fight alone. We're talking about silent persecutions that fall to the ground, injustices that become testimony, enemies who plotted your defeat being exposed and shamed. And I'll go further. If you read and declare Psalm 35 this morning with faith and conviction, you will experience the immediate collapse of whatever was holding you back spiritually, emotionally, and even financially. It's as if invisible chains were breaking before you. This isn't just any video, it's a warning and a key that can change your story today. So get ready, because what you're about to hear here isn't theory. It's a revelation on how to defeat hidden enemies that until now seemed untouchable. Now it's clear. This content has opened your eyes to understand how Psalm 35 overthrows hidden enemies and brings victory to areas of your life that were blocked. You will never walk the same way again after this revelation. And since this word strengthened you and gave you direction, it's only right that others also have access to this truth. So leave your like and subscribe to the channel now, because this strengthens this message and helps bring transformation to many more people who also need this liberation. Have you ever noticed how life sometimes feels like a struggle you can't explain? It's that strange feeling that something is always holding you back, as if an invisible force is placing obstacles in your path. You prepare yourself, do everything right, but just as you're about to move forward, something happens. A door that was about to open closes. A relationship that seemed secure falls apart. A job opportunity disappears out of nowhere. It's as if there's something operating behind the scenes, unseen but clearly affecting your life. Psalm 35 comes into play here. It's not just a pretty text to recite, it's a declaration of spiritual warfare, a way for you to put God on the front line against what you can't face alone. And when you understand this, the way you pray and view situations changes completely. Many people live their lives as if they were on a battlefield without weapons. They even realize they're fighting something, but they don't know how to fight it, or who to fight. This is where Psalm 35 reveals its power. It shows that you don't need to chase your enemies, you don't need to waste energy trying to defeat those who persecute you. What you need is to place this war in the right hands, because when God decides to step in, no hidden force can resist. This is liberating because it takes away the burden of trying to control what cannot be controlled. Instead of wasting energy on useless fights, you direct your faith in the right direction, and that's when the results begin to appear. And don't think that hidden enemies are always people. Sure, sometimes they're people who rise up against you unfairly, who speak ill behind your back, who plot against you for no reason. But there are even more dangerous enemies, those you don't see. Envy, negative words hurled at you, environments charged with heavy energy, spiritual situations that drain your peace. These enemies don't show up front. They don't declare themselves. They work in silence. And that's precisely why Psalm 35 is so necessary. It protects not only against what you see, but especially against what you don't see. And let's be honest, what brings us down most isn't what we can see. It's what's hidden and catches us by surprise. Now pay attention, because here's a point that can significantly change the way you approach life. When you pray based on Psalm 35, you're not just asking for protection, you're activating a spiritual position. It's as if you're placing God as your advocate, as the one who will defend your cause against all accusations and injustices. Have you ever seen someone with a strong and influential advocate? They may even be being persecuted, but they feel at peace because they know someone important is fighting for them. That's exactly the feeling you get when you rely on this prayer. Peace. You rest because you know you're no longer alone. And tell me something. Can you imagine the relief of finally not having to fight alone? Write your words in the comments .victory, because just by declaring this word you are already aligning your faith with what God is preparing. And there's another important thing. When you begin practicing this prayer, you notice that hidden enemies not only fall, but are also exposed. What was happening in secret, that situation that seemed inexplicable, begins to be revealed before you. It's as if God turns on a light in a dark room, and suddenly you see everything that was hidden. Those who oppose you appear. What was holding you back is identified, and you finally understand why some things weren't moving forward. And this clarity is liberating, because there's no more room for confusion, doubt, or deception. You're no longer held hostage by tormenting thoughts. You know exactly where the problem lies, and have the assurance that God will solve it. Maybe you're thinking right now, okay, but does that really happen? Isn't that an exaggeration? And the answer is simple. Yes, it does. How many times? Have you noticed situations that seemed inexplicable, and after praying, everything became clear? This is no coincidence. It's the hand of God at work. And the more you practice this kind of prayer, the more you realize that there's a greater force fighting for you. This doesn't mean that problems disappear out of nowhere, but it does mean that you no longer face them in the same way. You have an advantage, a covering, a shield, and it's this difference that separates those who crumble in, struggles from those who rise above with their heads held high. And do you know what the most interesting detail is? This psalm was written precisely at a time of unjust persecution. The psalmist was not to blame. He had done nothing to deserve the attacks he suffered, yet people rose up against him anyway. How many times have you found yourself in the same situation, attacked, criticized, or boycotted for no reason? It's painful because it seems so unfair, but this psalm shows that no matter the magnitude of the injustice, nor the power of those who rise up against you, God always has the final say. This brings such a sense of security that it's impossible not to share it. And here I want you to think about something. What would your life be like if these hidden enemies you can't even see simply fell to the ground? What would it be like to wake up tomorrow and realize that the weight has lifted, that the persecution has lost its strength, that what once blocked you no longer has power? This is the promise contained in this psalm, and believe me, when you embrace it, no darkness can resist it. But there is one detail that still needs to be revealed, and that's exactly what we'll delve into in the next section. Have you ever noticed that there are situations in your life that don't make sense? Those times when you look around and think, but I didn't do anything to deserve this. Why are they against me? It's in these moments that we understand the weight of hidden enemies. They don't appear openly. They don't come to you and say, I'm against you. They act in the shadows, hidden, setting silent traps to bring you down when you least expect it. This is exactly what Psalm 35 shows, the recognition that there are forces working against us in secret, and that we need to enlist God to reveal and disarm these traps before they reach us. And do you know why this is so important? Because most of the time, you only notice the attack when you're already wounded. You only understand something was wrong when you've already lost the opportunity, when you're already in the midst of confusion, when you already feel exhausted and discouraged. It's like walking down a pothole-filled road in the dark. You only realize it after you fall. Now, when you bring this psalm into your life, it's like a flashlight is turned on in the middle of that road. You keep walking, but now you see the potholes before you fall. That's what we're talking about. The prayer that reveals the enemy before he can strike. And here's a point many people don't realize. These hidden enemies aren't always out there. Sometimes they also manifest within us, in the form of sabotaging thoughts, insecurities, fears, and bad memories that insist on trapping you in the past. Have you ever noticed how often the hardest fight isn't against what's happening outside, but against what's happening in your mind? This is the kind of enemy that seems invisible because you can't point a finger at it, but it steals your peace and blocks your progress. Psalm 35 serves this purpose as well, to shine a light within you, to expose and overthrow the internal enemies that were preventing you from living the life God intended. And look, there's no denying it. It's uncomfortable, because when you pray this way, some truths emerge. People you thought were on your side show another side. Intentions that seemed good turn out to be deceptive, and even situations that seemed like opportunities turn out to be traps. Does it hurt? Of course it hurts. But it's better to deal with the pain of revelation than to live deceived and be destroyed later. That's exactly what the prayer of Psalm 35 does. It exposes. And once exposed, that thing no longer has power over you. It's like pulling back the curtain and showing a magician's trick. The illusion ends instantly. I want to ask you something very direct. Have you ever experienced something like this? Finding out that someone who claimed to be your friend was actually against you. This experience is hard but also liberating because you realize you were being deceived and now have the chance to protect yourself. Write your words in the comments, .clarity, because that's exactly what happens when you bring this psalm into your life. You gain clarity about who's truly on your side and who was just waiting for the chance to bring you down. And the most incredible thing is that this clarity doesn't come from gossip. It doesn't come from trying to figure things out on your own. It comes directly from God's action. When you surrender your struggle to Him, He acts behind the scenes. He brings to light what was hidden. And when God reveals, there's no doubt. You don't wonder, is this really it? You simply know. It's as if the Holy Spirit places within you a certainty so great that there's no denying it. And from that moment on, your attitude changes. You no longer feel lost, no longer flail around aimlessly, because now you see the truth and know where to go. Now here's a point that might surprise you. The hidden enemy isn't always someone or something you consider bad. Often it disguises itself as a blessing, an opportunity, even a right relationship. That's why so many people enter into businesses that end in losses, relationships that only bring pain, or paths that seem good at first but turn into traps later. The enemy knows how to hide and disguise himself, and this is precisely where the importance of this psalm comes in. It unmasks, it removes the makeup of lies and shows reality as it is. This may scare you at first, but in the end, it's liberating, because you stop being deceived and start making decisions based on truth. And do you know what the natural consequence of this is? You become stronger. Every time something hidden is revealed, you learn to trust God even more, and this creates a firmer, more mature faith, less dependent on appearances. You no longer get caught up in what seems right, but in what truly is right. And this changes everything because it brings security and confidence to every step you take. Now, think with me. If this psalm has the power to reveal and expose hidden enemies, what happens when God's justice begins to act after this revelation? This is the part that will move you even more, because it's not enough to simply expose the enemy. You need to see justice being done. Have you ever noticed how, when we suffer injustice, our first reaction is to retaliate? It's that thought that immediately arises, I'll respond in kind, I'll show I'm not stupid. But this, deep down, only creates more wear and tear and carries even more weight. Psalm 35 shows just the opposite. It reveals that true justice doesn't come from our own hands, nor from our ability to retaliate. Real justice comes from God. It is He who raises the banner of our cause, and shows, publicly and clearly, who is right and who is wrong. And when you understand this, your heart is filled with peace, because you no longer need to carry the burden of proving anything to anyone. How many times have you found yourself trying to explain to others that you didn't do what they said? And still, it seemed like no one believed you. It's exhausting fighting lies and unfair accusations, isn't it? But here's the thing, you no longer have to fight this war alone. Psalm 35 makes it clear that God is the one who goes before you and takes charge of your defense. It's like having the best lawyer in the world handling your case, while you just have to hold firm in faith. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to hand over their most difficult problems to someone infinitely more capable of solving them? This point is very powerful because it shows us that God's justice never fails. It may even be delayed in our eyes, but it always arrives. And when it arrives, it not only corrects the situation, but also puts everything in its rightful place. Those who plotted against you are exposed, and your life becomes a living testament that no one can stop the advancement of those under God's protection. And look, there's nothing more impactful than seeing the turnaround that only He can bring. People who laughed at your defeat are forced to witness your victory. I know that often waiting for this justice isn't easy, because we're in a hurry. We want everything resolved overnight. But God's justice goes beyond our logic. It not only defends you, but also works to ensure the outcome is so complete that no one else will dare to oppose your life in the same way. He not only wins the battle, He sets an example. That's why trusting in this justice is so essential. You learn to rest knowing that God doesn't sleep, and that nothing that's happening to you has gone unnoticed in His eyes. And let me ask you, have you ever been in a situation where it seemed like everyone was against you? but suddenly something happened and everything turned in your favor? This is the mark of God's justice. It's when the impossible happens and even those who doubted recognize that it was the hand of the Lord. Write your words in the comments. Justice, because declaring this is a way of aligning your faith with what you want to see happen in your life. Now think with me. If God's justice is already enough to overturn accusations and expose the truth, what happens when that justice also begins to free you from unjust judgments, silent persecution, and even emotional prisons that were draining your energy? This is the next step we need to delve deeper into, because it's not enough to simply recognize God's justice. It's time to understand how it manifests itself, bringing liberation in areas you didn't even realize were trapped. One of the greatest pains a person can bear is being unfairly judged or attacked. It's that feeling of powerlessness when someone fabricates something about you, distorts the facts, or creates stories that never happened. And no matter how hard you try to explain yourself, it seems no one listens. This corrodes you from within, because injustice wounds the heart and often leaves deep emotional scars. Psalm 35 touches on this very point. It speaks of false accusations, of people who rise up against someone who did nothing to deserve it. And here's the detail that changes everything. Instead of trying to prove innocence by force, the psalmist hands the case over to God, and it is He who delivers justice. Think about it. How many times have you lost sleep over things said about you? Made up words, gossip, misinterpreted situations. You keep trying to think of strategies to defend yourself, imagining what you could say or do to clear your name. But the truth is, the more you exhaust yourself trying to justify something, the more trapped you become in the pain of that situation. What Psalm 35 teaches is just the opposite. When injustice strikes, you don't need to waste energy trying to fix what others have created against you. God is the one fighting for you, and He has a way of acting that dismantles any lie. And look, divine justice isn't just about showing who was wrong. It goes further. It brings restoration. Because there's no point in unmasking the accuser if your heart is still broken by the pain they caused. God doesn't just act on what's visible. He also treats internal wounds. He heals the scars of rejection, washes away the weight of accusation, and restores the trust you've lost in yourself, and even in the people around you. This is powerful because it transforms not only your image in the eyes of others, but especially your inner life. Many people don't understand this and continue to live trapped in a past of unjust accusations. They carry guilt, shame, and insecurity for things they never did, but have heard so many times that they've come to believe them. Psalm 35 is like a key that sets us free. It shows that the final word doesn't belong to the accuser, nor to those who judge, without knowing but to God. And when He declares innocence, there's no room for condemnation. This is the kind of liberation that's priceless. Now let me ask you something very direct. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? It's one of the worst feelings, isn't it? If this has happened to you, write the word in the comments below. Deliverance. Because this is the sign that you believe that God can transform even the most unjust situations into testimonies of victory. And there's a detail here that you may never have stopped to consider. Often these unfair judgments come not only from without, but also from within. How many times have you blamed yourself for past mistakes? How many times have you relived old situations and continued to punish yourself for something you can no longer change? This is an even more cruel enemy, because it binds you with emotional chains that steal your joy and hinder your growth. But when you bring Psalm 35 into your life, even this internal voice of accusation begins to lose its power. It's as if God is saying, I've already taken care of this, now you're free to move on. And it's precisely at this point that the transformation begins to become even clearer. Because when you understand that you're free from unfair accusations, something changes within you. Fear begins to give way to confidence, insecurity is replaced by courage, and the weight that once weighed you down gives way to the lightness of knowing you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You discover that your life doesn't depend on the approval of others, but on what God has already declared about you. But there's something even deeper that needs to be revealed, because from the moment you learn to deal with unfair accusations and find deliverance, a new attitude emerges, complete trust in God. And it's precisely this unshakable trust that we need to talk about next. When we talk about trusting in God, it seems obvious, but in practice, it's one of the greatest challenges. It's easy to say I trust in God when everything is going well, but it's when the storm hits that this trust is truly tested. Psalm 35 shows exactly this. The psalmist is surrounded by enemies, unjustly attacked, persecuted, and defamed, yet he chooses not to seek revenge or retaliate. He chooses to place the situation in God's hands and trust. This is powerful because it teaches that true strength lies not in fighting back, but in keeping our hearts steadfast, knowing that God is the one who fights the battles. And let's face it, this isn't an easy path. We live in a world that preaches the idea that everyone has to fend for themselves, that you must always fight back, show strength, prove your worth at any cost. But this logic only creates more pain and more struggle. When you decide to trust in God, you're going against this norm. You're saying, I don't need to prove anything, because He is the one who guarantees my victory. This brings a peace the world doesn't understand. And this peace is precisely what keeps you standing when everything around you seems to be crumbling. This is where the prayer of Psalm 35 becomes practical, because trusting God isn't an abstract feeling. It's a daily decision. It's waking up in the morning, seeing the problems before you, and choosing to believe that God is taking care of every detail. It's when you could despair, but decide to wait. It's when you could retaliate, but decide to remain silent and let God act. This attitude doesn't mean passivity, but wisdom. It's understanding that not every battle needs to be fought by you. Some can only be won when you leave room for God to act. And here's a point that's perhaps the hardest to accept. Trusting God means giving up control. And for many people, this is almost unbearable. Because we all want to be sure how things will turn out. We want to know the outcome before we begin the journey. But trusting is precisely walking even without seeing the whole path. It's like driving at night with your headlights on low beam. You don't see the whole road, but you see enough to take the next step. This is the trust that Psalm 35 inspires. And look, when you decide to live this way, things change. Anxiety begins to fade because you understand that it's not just up to you. Fear disappears because you know there's someone bigger taking care of the situation. Even criticism and accusations don't hurt as much because you're convinced your life is in the right hands. This doesn't mean problems disappear, but it does mean they no longer have the power to paralyze you. Now I want you to reflect a little. How many times have you missed out on something incredible because you were trapped in the fear of failure? How many doors have closed because you couldn't trust? That's why this point is so transformative. When you learn to trust, you free yourself from fear. And I want you to declare this in the comments with the word trust, because this is the sign that you are determined to give your battles to God and rest in His care. But there's something even more interesting about this process. When you begin to truly trust, you realize that your victory isn't just personal. It becomes a testimony. People around you see your attitude and are impacted. They may not understand your faith, but they notice the difference in how you deal with struggles. And this generates enormous curiosity, because everyone wants to know how someone manages to get through difficult situations without losing their peace. And it's precisely here that a powerful detail emerges. This confidence transforms into joy, into a living testimony of victory. But how does this joy manifest itself in the midst of battle? That's what we'll talk about in the next point. You might be wondering, how is it possible to have joy in the midst of so much struggle, persecution, and accusation? And that's a fair question, because human logic is simple. We only rejoice when everything is going well, when things go right. But Psalm 35 shows us another perspective. The joy that comes when God's justice manifests itself, even in wartime. It's not that superficial joy of laughing on the outside, but being destroyed on the inside. It's a joy born of the certainty that you are already victorious, even before you see victory with your own eyes. And this is something that completely changes the way you face problems. When you trust that God is fighting your battles, your attitude changes. You don't despair when faced with bad news, because you know they don't have the final word. You're not shaken by criticism, because you understand that what validates your life isn't the opinion of others. This generates such great peace that it naturally transforms into joy. It's as if a weight falls off your shoulders and you can breathe deeply again. This joy isn't a fleeting emotion, but a testimony. It's as if your life silently says, I know God has already taken care of everything, And you know what's most interesting? This joy begins to bother your enemies, because they expect to see you on the ground, defeated, powerless. They want you to crumble, to lose hope, to live sad and aimless. But when they look and realize that even in the midst of war you remain steadfast and even joyful, it dismantles any plan against you. Joy in the midst of battle is a powerful weapon, because it shows that the enemy has not managed to steal what is most precious to you, your faith and your trust in God. Now pay attention to something very powerful. Joy isn't just for you, it's also a testimony to those around you. How many people are watching your journey without you realizing it? Family, friends, co-workers, many people who may never say anything to you, but who are watching how you react to problems. When these people see that, instead of despair, you maintain joy and hope, they begin to ask themselves, what does this person have that I don't? And that's when your life becomes a living sermon. You don't need long speeches to show who God is. Your attitude speaks for itself. I want you to think of a situation that seemed impossible, and yet you felt peace in the midst of it. Remember how powerful that was. This experience is precisely proof that the Lord's joy doesn't depend on circumstances. And I want you to write the word in the comments, happiness, because this is the mark of someone who has already decided not to surrender their heart to sadness but to God's care. Declaring this is like reinforcing within yourself that no matter what happens, your joy will not be stolen. But there's something even deeper here. This joy isn't the fruit of human effort, but of a lifestyle of constant prayer, of daily seeking, because it's impossible to have joy in the midst of war without being connected to God. It's prayer that strengthens, renews, and gives us the strength to carry on. And it's at this point that we begin to realize the importance of maintaining a continuous, insistent, and persistent practice of faith. It's not enough to pray occasionally. We must remain in prayer even when we don't see anything changing. And that's precisely what brings us to the next point. Because joy is a consequence, but its foundation lies in something greater, the practice of constant, faith-filled prayer capable of changing entire scenarios. So far, we've talked about trust, justice, and even the joy that arises when you surrender your battles to God. But there's a secret that underpins all of this, the practice of constant and persistent prayer. And this is where the teachings we learn from men of faith, like David Yonggi Cho, gain even more strength, because he always emphasized the power of continuous prayer, the kind that never stops, the kind that insists, the kind that returns to God every day. Psalm 35 clearly shows that this isn't just any prayer, but an insistent cry that continues until we see the answer. It's like knocking on heaven's door, never giving up until it opens. Many people pray once and expect everything to change immediately, and when they don't see anything happen, they get frustrated, think it didn't work, and give up. But the prayer that truly transforms is the one that persists. It's the one you pray today, tomorrow, and then, even when you don't see any change. It's this prayer that builds within you resilience, spiritual maturity, and the strength to continue. Because victory comes not only from what happens outside, but from what happens within you as you persevere. And this is liberating, because you understand that you don't need to control the timing of the answer. You just need to remain faithful. And do you know what happens when you live this way? Hidden enemies begin to fall. It's amazing how things that had been blocked for years begin to unfold. Doors that seemed stuck open, situations that seemed definitive are reversed. People who were against you lose their strength. This is because constant prayer keeps the heavens moving over your life. It's as if each prayer were a brick placed in a spiritual construction until the day comes when the work is complete and you see before your eyes what you could only believe through faith. But it's not just about defeating enemies, it's also about protection. Because Psalm 35 isn't just about overcoming attacks, but about standing tall after victory. Many people achieve something, but lose because they don't keep praying. Persistence in faith is what ensures that victory lasts. And look, there's nothing more powerful than knowing that you've not only won, but that you remain protected, armored against any new attacks. This is the difference between someone who prays occasionally and someone who has made prayer a lifestyle. And here's a detail that moves us even more. This constancy in prayer not only defeats enemies, but also transforms you into a stronger person. You realize that you no longer react as before, that you don't despair easily, that you don't falter in the face of problems that once seemed enormous. This happens because prayer molds, strengthens, and prepares you for greater levels of victory. It's as if each battle won is training for the next, and each prayer offered fuel to keep you going. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever experienced that feeling of victory that seemed impossible, like something suddenly fell out of your sight? This is the mark of constant prayer. It's the sign that you didn't give up, even when it seemed like nothing would change. And I want you to write the word in the comments, perseverance, because it is this decision not to stop that opens space for the greatest victories. The most impactful thing is that when you live this way, you begin to see hidden enemies falling in almost unbelievable ways. People who plotted against you give up. Situations that once held you back disappear. And even internal problems like fears and insecurities lose strength. It's as if God clears the ground for you to move forward unburdened. This is the consequence of those who never give up on prayer, of those who continue even when everything seems to be against them. Now you've realized how this content opened your eyes and strengthened your faith, clearly demonstrating that Psalm 35 is a weapon capable of defeating hidden enemies and unlocking victories that previously seemed impossible. This revelation not only brought understanding, but also guidance for you to live a lighter, more confident life. And since this word made a difference in your life, you can multiply this impact for others by simply liking and subscribing to the channel, so this message can reach even more lives in need of this transformation. I want you to write the word in the comments victory, to publicly declare what has already begun within you today, and stay tuned, because what's coming in the next video is even more powerful, something that will deepen this journey and reveal secrets that many people have never heard of, but that you will discover firsthand. So stay with me, because what has already begun here is just the beginning of a journey that will completely change the way you face your battles.